Hey, it's Brian Burns, and welcome to this episode of the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about buyer experience and seller experience, talking about exactly how our buyers become aware of the product, what causes that to happen. And then we're also going to explore a little bit on the sales side of what has to happen within that company for them to actually buy the product, which is really my expertise. Today, Adele's expertise is more on, how are the buyers going about discovering the need, exploring the market, hearing about the products and the services that are available, and then the decision-making process to actually take action and do something. Now, this plays really well into the ebook that Nudge.ai has done on how I make purchasing decisions, as well as the research that discoverorg.com has done on people in market and determining who is most likely to buy your product. So check out both of those ebooks as well. Let's dive into this interview. This is really an interesting interview and something that we all should really be thinking about. Let's get into it. Hi, Adele. Thanks for joining me today. As a way of getting started, tell us about yourself.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me. It's my favorite thing to talk about is buyer personas. And so a little bit about me, let's see, a little over 3 decades in B2B marketing and tech, and started this company, Buyer Persona Institute, in just about 8 years ago now. It's our anniversary coming up here in April. And our business is all around understanding the personas that matter and the messages that matter to buyers as they go through their journey to make a decision on a complex sale. And so that's really our focal point, I hope, for our talk today, as well as my background, Brian.
Cool. And what was your motivation to go out on your own?
This is my third company that I've owned. I started this company 8 years ago after selling my prior company. I built a course for a company called Pragmatic Marketing. Some of your listeners may know that company. They're really well known for product management training. And I built and owned their product marketing course. And for the 10 years prior to this, I traveled all over the world teaching that course. And then I sold it to Pragmatic Marketing just 8 years ago now. So going back to when I actually had a real job, is that what you mean, Brian?
No, you just, I always, I'm interested in what motivates people. Clearly, you were excited about this. Did you see no one else doing it well in the market? Or was it something that you just had such a passion for that you couldn't really find a place within a company to do it, or?
Yeah, so when I taught that course for Pragmatic Marketing, it was a 2-day course. There was a 1-hour module on buyer personas, and over the course of 10 years, thousands of feedback forms. People would say to me, the best part of this course was buyer personas, and we want more.
Yeah.
And so that, and plus, yeah, absolutely, buyer personas are the foundation of every marketing and sales decision around strategy. And so I saw that it was foundational, and certainly, going way back to my decades ago when I learned to interview people to understand how to engage them. I had a lot of background and experience in this area. So all of the above, really, in terms of why I did it.
Now, I think people either make too much of personas or too little. Mostly too little, isn't it?
The biggest problem with personas today is that people have too many of them,
yeah.
and that they're not grounded in the buyer's experience. They're sort of made up documents. Maybe somebody in sales sat down and gave marketing a few details around what they see around job title or role or some other kind of demographic. But what that results in is personas for every job title in every industry, at every company size, and every geography. And that's all just a waste of time. And then the information in the personas isn't really actionable or useful because it's so high level and it doesn't get into the buyer's experience. It doesn't get into how buyers actually make decisions to do business with your company. And that's what marketers and salespeople need. They need to know how buyers make decisions, how they make buying decisions.
Yeah.
And that's what the personas should be built around. So too many personas, not near enough of the right kind of insights. That's why I wrote the book on buyer personas. Is I figured that if we kept going down this path, pretty soon everybody would give up on them, and for good reason. It's kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, because most of the time when I talk to somebody, I go, who's your, your persona that you're going after. I hear CEO, CIO, CMO, and I'm like, but do they have the problem that you solve? And they're like, well, they're the ones who make the decision. Well, do they make the budget decision? They don't make the product decision. They're part of the process. And people seem to forget about, and I always try and say, like, what is the emotion that causes the purchase of your product?
Exactly. Yeah. What's the emotion? What are all the business conditions? And then what are all the criteria and the perceptions that buyers use to weigh the strengths and weaknesses of their options and choose one? And if you don't know that, then you don't really have a map for how to engage the buyer throughout their journey. And that's the whole value of this. It isn't just knowing the job title or role. I mean, your competitors know that. Everybody knows that. That's hardly an insight. It's not that useful.
Right. And I think people kind of oversimplify as like increase revenue, reduce costs. Well,
yeah. Well, there you go. Yeah, exactly. I want to grow and I want to reduce costs and I want to simplify my operations, and then we wonder why the marketing is still useless to buyers, and it really is. I mean, we interview thousands of buyers across hundreds of clients, and when we try to get them to talk about useful sales and marketing engagement, they just say, frankly, I'm going to my peers to get this information because the noise I get from the vendors isn't helpful.
And it's identical.
And it all looks alike. I literally had a guy say on a call, if I put the 3 vendors' brochures side by side on my desk and cover up the logo, I can't tell them apart. Why should I look at them?
And you know why that happens, because they just copy each other.
Well, because all we know is it's the CEO who wants to grow his business, and the COO who wants to streamline his operations, and the CMO who wants to. I mean, that's all we know. We don't know enough to be more effective and engaging and to be useful to buyers. So they're just starting to ignore us. And I'll tell you, as a career sales and marketing professional, that just scares the crap out of me, Brian. It really does. I mean, it's like we are making ourselves irrelevant to the very job that we most need to do, which is to persuade buyers that we have the best solution for their needs.
And what should people be doing?
Well, so the key is that you or someone needs to interview real buyers. So this idea that personas are fictional or made up just makes me crazy. Someone needs to interview real buyers to understand everything from the very beginning, from the moment in time when they decided that the status quo was no longer acceptable and they needed to make a change and they needed to invest in your category. Everything that triggered that event, and then everything they did and thought about as they went through from like, what are all the options? What are all the things, the companies that might help me? And then gradually narrowed that down to the one they selected. And this is about it isn't about surveys. It isn't about focus groups. It's about having a very structured but completely unscripted interview with real buyers and aggregating what they tell you to create a persona that tells you what the buyers want from that experience.
And what would some of those questions be? Because the obvious one is like, why did you buy this product, or why did you start looking to solve this problem, or how did you figure out you had this problem?
Yeah, so the only scripted question is this one. Take me back to the day when you first decided that you needed to solve this problem and tell me what triggered that decision. Now, what happens next is that the buyer's going to tell you that they wanted to grow their business and reduce their costs and, give you this long list of benefits. So this is where there's quite a bit of skill, and it's why I wrote a book about it, and it's why we do this research for a lot of our clients ourselves, is it takes quite a bit of skill to now get the buyer to talk about what was actually that trigger event. And this is about saying, well, you probably always wanted to reduce your cost and improve your operations and yada, yada, yada. What changed? What really went on in your mind or in the organization that caused you to decide that you needed to make this change now? And literally, we'll spend 5 or 10 minutes just asking follow-up questions to whatever the buyer says so that we can get real insight into that trigger moment. And then we're going to walk from then on. There's no script, but I'll tell you sort of the structure if you'd like, Brian.
Yeah.
So once we understand, and by the way, we're recording these interviews so we can transcribe them and bring out the buyer's actual words and emotions into this persona. But then we ask the buyer, okay, great. So now once that happened, what did you do first to understand which providers you ought to consider? And now we're going to spend 5 or 10 minutes finding out everything they did. And of course, as sales and marketing professionals, we really care a lot about this phase of the journey, right? Because this is where they have intent. They have intent to purchase, and they have intent to learn about which solutions might address their needs. So this is where we've got to be up front and center, where they're looking, and with content that they find useful, with words and messages and stories that they find useful. So we're going to spend another several minutes here following up on whatever they tell us. Well, I went to my peers and I asked them, great, what did your peers tell you that was helpful to you? What kind of advice did you get from your peers? So, and if they don't mention peers and they say they went out on the internet, then we're going to say, well, what did you learn on the internet and what was helpful and what did you hope to find that you couldn't find? And the key to this kind of a story, however, and we often say that our research is led by the only experts you should trust, which is your buyers. So in traditional research, there's a discussion guide or a set of questions or things you want to know. What this kind of interview, what makes it so useful and why buyers get emotional and open up and tell you everything, is because we're letting them lead the interview. So we're keeping them on task to go slowly through their journey. But every follow-up question we ask is based on something they told us. So if they don't mention going online to do a search, we don't say, well, geez, did you see our website or did you see that marketing campaign or was that useful? Not at all. We're looking at what they really did. Because when you ask questions like that, you're going to get the answers you want to hear. You're not going to get the truth from buyers. So the question is, okay, you went out and you talked to your peers. Did you do anything else? Well, yeah, we looked at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, or we looked at this, or we went online, and then you follow that path. But you don't introduce what you want to know. You let the buyer lead the journey.
And have you ever dealt in a market where it was completely latent, meaning there's a brand new technology that they're unaware of, that the company is proactively either marketing or selling or both, and help guide them on how to do that?
Absolutely. And so when we get a client that's trying to break into a new market, first of all, this happens much less frequently than people think. Chances are that your buyers have been spending money to solve that problem in some way. Maybe you have a breakthrough solution, but it's incredibly rare that you actually are solving a problem that nobody was trying to solve anymore. Can you agree with that, Brian?
Sure. I mean, there's like today, there's thousands of, what's being called AI, whether it's AI or just software that does something that people are doing today, either by hand or by service or just doing it poorly. Now there's a faster, easier, modern way of doing it, but nobody knows about it.
Right. And so then you're going to interview people who have been trying to solve that problem and find out what triggers their decision. I'll give you an example. This one's pretty accessible. And we didn't do this study, but if Apple had come to us before the launch of the Apple Watch, what we would have done is we would have interviewed people who had within the last year bought iPhones and a Fitbit or some other kind of exercise, wristband kind of a device. And we would have found out everything they did and thought about that motivated those decisions. Because if you think about it, what Apple needed to do with that launch was capture those buyers who were now intent on going out and buying very different products than an Apple Watch. But they had to get those buyers to understand the value of the Apple Watch as a different approach. So we would have walked those buyers through those entire journeys. We would have discovered where they go, where they're looking, what factors into that decision. And then at the end of the interview, we would have introduced the value prop for the Apple Watch to get feedback on that. But now in the beginning part of the interview, we would have already understood the mindset and persona of the buyer that we have to reach and that we have to the buying decision we have to interrupt in order to attract people to the Apple Watch. Does that kind of help?
It does. And I'm sure you must run into an enormous amount internal resistance from product management. Let's take that Apple case, because I'm a huge Apple fan.
Okay.
And I have a Apple Watch on right now, which battery lasts until 2 p.m.
There you go.
So I do need to know what time it is all day.
Yeah, darn it. Yeah.
Right. And there's about probably 90% of the functionality on this watch I don't need.
Yep.
The number one thing I need is my schedule so that I don't have to open my phone all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But you and obviously with Microsoft, this is why, the original tablet didn't work, is because they wanted to put the whole Windows OS on it. And they didn't understand, and this is what Apple did well, is that they didn't try and put iOS or onto the Mac or the Mac's operating system onto the iOS devices. They kept them separate. And that was looked upon poorly within the industry, but it was a brilliant move.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. So when you said I get resistance from product management, what was the question there?
Well, the issue is product management wants to do what they can do versus what the customer wants. And
the product managers. So first of all, we're not trying to change the product so much with our work. We're trying to change the way most of our clients, and it's not that we don't think we add value to the product manager, but most of our clients have a product and they're trying to figure out how to take it to market. If product management, I used to run product management. So there was a day when I was, CMO and ran product management and product marketing. And, what I certainly wanted the product managers to think about the buying experience, but it was helpful and I think it's helpful for your listeners to understand that there's a difference between buying criteria and using criteria.
Yeah.
Or another way to say that, there's a difference between the buyer experience and the customer experience. And product managers need to care about both. Marketers really need to care mostly about the buying experience. And so I think as product managers, back when I managed those teams, I was trying to get them to balance the investment the company was making in features and functions and capabilities that would satisfy buying criteria so that we could get the customer business so we could win them, and that against using criteria, and which is what's going to keep you happy once you are a customer, because it is a virtuous circle, right? I mean, there's so much peer advice, and your experience with having your Apple Watch die at 2 o'clock, and you tell a friend about that, and they're going to be less likely to buy one. So, but did you know about that, Brian, when you bought it?
No, it worked fine until I bought my iPhone 10. And then, of course, I had to sync it, the watch with the new iPhone. And then all of a sudden, the battery didn't last as long. So I kind of went through. And I think I know what it is. I listen to a lot of podcasts. And now with this version, it brings up the podcast player, which I think is eating up all the battery. But
sure.
Here I am, a sales guy, having to figure out this technology.
Yeah.
But that's an issue. Now, let's take the outcome that you have of these personas.
Okay.
What does the person do with them? Do they define their marketing mix? Do they find their strategy? What is the use of it in a tactical sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many applications. So, the main thing is for marketing to build its marketing plays and sales to build the sales plays after this. And so for our clients, we lead a workshop, or if you want to read my book, it's in chapter 8, where you get a small group of folks. We recommend 6 people who are experts on what the product does and the competitive landscape. And in about 8 hours, you can go through every insight about the buyer experience, including all these verbatim quotes that were retained from the actual interviews, and look at each one of those insights separately. There may be 30 or 40 in a typical buyer experience. There's 30 or 40 sort of expectations they have. And for every one of those, develop a response, and we're trying to focus on, now we know what the buyers want to hear because that's what they told us in the interviews. And now we can shape a response that doesn't just talk about growing your revenue and reducing your costs, but gets directly to the heart of the matter of how the buyers talked about it and what they wanted to know. And by the end of that 8 hours, what the process allows you to do is to understand not only how you address every expectation the buyer has, but also where your top, we call them value wedges, or the thin edge of the wedge, where your top 5 points of entry are to engage that buyer, because you can find the places where the buyer's expectation and your approach to addressing that expectation is so finely matched, so perfectly tuned and potentially differentiated from your competitors, that, and I said potentially because we don't all have 5 things that are unique that matter to buyers, but at least what we know now for salespeople and marketing is that when we go to market with these message themes, these value wedges, that these are things that we know matter to the buyers. And we know that we've built a really compelling way to talk to buyers about what matters to them. And so I often tell people it's really not the persona that's the deliverable from this work. The deliverable is those 5 or so message themes, those sales plays, those marketing plays. And that's where this just changes everything.
Now, my experience has been on that sales side, probably 25 years of it. And what I was always mystified that nobody understood that it was a lot more than just going in, giving a presentation, a demo, and a quote. And I was always like, there's a lot more, guys.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but that's the point, Brian, is if your listeners interview a few buyers, they're going to know that, because the buyers, and of course we're doing these interviews what you call double blind. The people that we interview don't know who our client is, and we don't tell the client who we interviewed. So it's really, people get really candid with us.
I bet.
And they'll just rag on and on about salespeople that show up with a PowerPoint presentation and a demo and don't can't go deeper than that. And it's just so, if you want people, if you want marketing to know that, just have them listen to the verbatims from the buyer's experience, and they will be very clear that it ain't working.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my life. And it's like, I'm telling you, 99%, even today, think that that's what the sales process is. Or they add on the follow-up, which is just the hounding of where is it?
Yeah.
Can I update the
Begging.
quote?
It's like get a tin cup out and beg.
It is because,
okay.
yeah, it'll be March 31st and Q1's over. And, I forecasted the deal. Well, it sounds like you're in a great business.
If we could get sales and marketing to wrap their head around, the goal is to be useful to the buyer. These buyers, you said your audience is B2B. This is a high consideration buying decision. This is one where the buyers potentially their job or their profits or their career is at stake if they blow this. And now if we could get our head around, our job is to be helpful to that buyer, to have them through this experience, through the buying experience, see that we get it, what they really need, and we very, very concisely and clearly deliver on what they need without all the, we are the market leading provider of flexible, scalable, compatible, integrated solutions for enterprise-wide awesome business. I mean, that stuff, and the buyers have their fingers down their throat when you're telling that.
Because it doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't mean a darn thing. If we could just think of our job as being helpful to buyers, because it's like anywhere else. If you meet someone in a crowded place and they do something that's helpful to you, you can quickly begin to trust them. If, on the other hand, all they do is talk about themselves, you're like out of there.
Yep.
And it's a simple idea, but in fairness, Brian, marketers haven't had the information they needed to know how to be helpful to buyers.
True. Very true. And everybody's kind of does what they're told, does what's expected of them. And I got an analogy or a little story. Me and my buddy, we go to the same restaurant almost once a week, and the servers know us, and they tell us the specials every time. And it's like we don't need to know the specials, and we tell them back to them, and they laugh. But that's not what we want. What we like is our cocktails and get to chat it up for a while. But this has been a fascinating conversation. I think you're onto something big, probably bigger than you know.
Well, thanks, Brian. I suspect you're right. It's really hard to change the status quo, right? And as you've been in this world long enough to know that that gets enough momentum around the stupid stuff that's being done around personas. And so then that's why I accepted your invite today. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about how this should work.
And who's the ideal client for your organization?
Tech is our sweet spot, but we're looking for, we're doing a study right now that has heavy duty construction equipment. So anything that involves a high consideration buying decision. And for us, that means where the buyers spend weeks, months, or up to a year or more evaluating their options and making a choice, because that's where these interviews yield amazing insight. The higher consideration the buying decision, the more value we can deliver.
And where can they find you?
At buyerpersona.com. And so that's our website. And I'm on Facebook, Buyer Persona. I'm on Twitter at Buyer Persona. It's just all things Buyer Persona.
At companies, I always find it surprising how little real research is done into this. Everyone sits in what I call the bunker, the meeting rooms, talking about what they think their customers care about or what they're valuing or what they're really doing, as opposed to actually talking to them and having either a firm, especially an outside firm, somebody who isn't emotionally attached to it, doesn't have a personal win to it, can actually find out and help you describe exactly what your marketing and sales approach should be. I developed my course, Winning the Complex Sale, about how internally companies make buying decisions, both from a technical standpoint about what product and why to make a change, to the actual administrative process, the political process, and the economic process. So check that out to B2B Revenue Leadership, b2brevenue.com under training. It's right there. And it's a year-long course for your salespeople. Of course, it doesn't take a year to go through the material. It takes a couple weeks to a month to go through the material. But it takes a year to really integrate it into your process, to go through several deals, to go through 4 quarters of winning deals, of making deals bigger and faster, and how to block out your competition and just lock them out completely, how to win those beauty contest type deals, how to get into pure cold accounts and really maximize the revenue from it. So it's called Closing the Complex Sale. Check it out. If you'd like to talk to me about it, send me a little note on LinkedIn, connect up with me on LinkedIn, and please tell someone this week about the B2B Revenue Leadership Podcast. Please share the content if you see it on LinkedIn. I really appreciate that. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.